What's the smell? It smells like trash.
The lore of Tekken has always been one of the most interesting in gaming history. It doesn't have hours of in-depth world building like Souls games or essays of every single being in a game like Mass Effect, but the team behind Tekken always made sure to bring every single character to life, and for a fighter, that's pretty rare. I mean, most companies that made fighters, especially in the 90s, had little to no care on the overarching plotline, but Tekken had a plan. It had a plan that moved the characters forward each game, impacting them so that the next time you saw them, they'd have different motivations, looks, and in some cases different fighting styles to show how much they've changed. Did most of the competitive scene that loves Tekken not really care about the silly endings each game? Yeah, but the true Tekken fans at heart, myself very much included, loved this aspect of Tekken. So when Tekken 6 was on its way to release, fans were overjoyed that they could play the first cinematic campaign mode in the franchise's history. They played it and it became such a mixed bag for everyone involved. I was under the impression that the majority of people hated it, but after researching it a lot recently, I found in a lot of the comment sections people are really nostalgic for this, and in a way I am too. I did like it a lot as a kid, but even back then I knew I didn't love it how I wanted to or how I loved previous Tekken stories. I think most everyone could agree, even if they liked it, that it could have been a lot better. And this got me thinking. How could the story in Tekken 6 have been improved? What were the main parts that people didn't like, and how could more context and a better plan for the future help make the story sit right with fans? Well, I was pondering about the lore of the Tekken games recently and had an idea. I wanted to rewrite the Tekken 6 story to see if I can get my version to better fit contextually in the storyline of the games, as it does kind of stand out like a sore thumb at times. But first, I wanted to get into what went wrong with Tekken 6. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with Tekken 6's story. It's just that the game subverted expectations of the players in a way that didn't really get over. The game was very much advertised as Kazuya versus Jin, and then you had to play the whole game as this new Village of the Hidden Leaf looking dork and his robot anime waifu. Bold. And I know you didn't have to play as Lars the whole time, you eventually got to play as other characters from the game, but it didn't matter if you had Armor King running amok just for the next cutscene to have Lars again. The entirety of the scenario campaign was Tekken Force exclusive, so even the boss battles where you'd fight a character from the roster was that mode as opposed to the regular fighter mode. And despite there being a lot of creativity, it wasn't enough, and characters like Lars and Alyssa felt super forced and left a lasting mark that some fans still hold resentment towards. Jin turning heel isn't a bad thing to do either, but it came so out of nowhere, and at no point did the game fully justify his actions. Even at the end, and future games treat him like an anti-hero who did what he had to do, which, yes, is kind of true, but it isn't coming across like the Eren Yeager they want it to be. These and other small issues were the main points of contention with a lot of fans. It is mainly what I wanted to try and fix in this video. Now, before we start, I did want to list off a few notes/rules to know going in. 1. Big inspirations for how this campaign mode's design and gameplay are from Tekken 7 and 8 story modes, Mortal Kombat X, and the Subspace Emissary from Brawl. 2. Significant plot moments are written with the knowledge of Tekken 7 and 8 plus changing events in 5, so keep that in mind. 3. Keep in mind that my lovely editor Nate has never used Blender before, so some of these models might come out looking a little jank. Be nice, it's our first time doing this. And 4. I had so much fun writing this, and I'm well aware of how unrealistic it is, especially for the time Tekken 6 was made. Essentially, I wanted to write my own Tekken fanfiction, and this was an excuse to do so. And if there's one good place to start this thing, it's slightly adjusting Tekken 5's endings to set up for what we do in 6. Some pretty cool stuff happened in Tekken 5's story that you could easily forget about given how much they don't really address all of it later on. But the first change is that Wang's ending is canon. To me, it already is canon because when Kazumi is warning Akuma of the destruction that the Mishimas will cause, we get a brief flashback of all the grief that characters experience because of what's happened, and this scene was there. So to me, after Jin defeated Jinpachi, he didn't immediately disintegrate. His body was lying there for Wang to find. But after Jinpachi dies, Wang finds a token bearing some ancient, almost Anubis looking design in the ashes. Also, it's good to know I think in canon, Devil Jin should have defeated Jinpachi. After the fight, he flies away only to not make it very far before passing out. This is where Asuka's ending is changed to canon as it's so vital to her character. As a Kazuma, she unknowingly depletes the Devil Gene away from Jin. The only thing I change is that when he wakes up, instead of falling into his cousin's chest for what feels like forever, he accidentally headbutts her on his way up, breaking her nose. Angry and embarrassed, she punches him out and leaves. Xiaoyu's ending is changed completely as she doesn't try to figure out time travel, which is dumb. Instead, she's in the hospital at Hwoarang's side. I always liked the idea that Jin, Xiaoyu, and Hwoarang were a little shonen trio in Tekken 3 before all the bad stuff happened. So after hearing that Jin nearly killed his best friend, Xiaoyu was waiting at his side for him to wake up. The ending ends with Hwoarang opening his eyes, and that'll lead into Tekken 6. Also, keep in mind, I'm writing this with the knowledge of Tekken 5 and Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection, which is just an upgraded version of the game with some newcomers like Lily, who defeated Forrest Law to enter the tournament. But instead of taking his spot entirely, I'm gonna have Forrest enter the tournament with Lily as her lackey for losing to her. He's broke and she's paying him, so it makes sense. Lily's ending is changed to the gag from the Tetsuman manga where Lily stalks Asuka to her school and enrolls purely to obsess over her after losing at the tournament. Also, Forrest's ending is changed to some funny gag of him following Lily around while she shops and he has to carry everything because that sounds funny. And those are all the changes I would make to 5 to better suit the story I'm about to tell. It'll be a 3-act structure plus some different character endings at the end, so kick back and let me know what y'all think. Let's begin. The game begins with a prologue narration to catch players up on the coming story. It doesn't have to be narrated by a character, it could be Harada himself, who cares? The narrator reads, after the events of the 5th Iron Fist tournament, the Mishima Zaibatsu led by Jin Kazuma seemingly wages war onto the world. Random airstrikes on large capitals, political influence leading countries to war, and a complete takeover of the United Nations. Only one army can possibly stand up to this overwhelming power. G Corporation led by Kazuya Mishima. After months of bloodshed, one of Jin's top soldiers defected and took a quarter of the Zaibatsu army with him. That man was Lars Alexanderson, and he formed Yggdrasil, a revolutionary army to fight against the Zaibatsu. Although they are the enemy, they notably don't help G-Corp in their fight, but they don't stand against them entirely either. The scenario campaign then begins the same as before. Lars and his men raid a Zaibatsu laboratory. They clean house and make an odd discovery. A girl in a chamber pod. She's listed to be Alyssa Boskanovich, but according to reports, she should be dead. She's been dead for years, in fact. In the confusion, a bomb is thrown like before, but instead it's a flash grenade. In the blinding light, we see a hand holding a poison dart. The hand looks like Zafina's, and we see it thrown into Lars's neck. He stumbles, and we see his point of view as he hallucinates, flashing memories of what defines him, his war crimes, his regrets, Togu, his mother, and lastly, Heihachi Mishima. We're back in the room. We see everyone on the floor, and Lars is the only one who wakes. He stumbles and accidentally opens the pod containing Alyssa. She greets him and he reveals he can't remember anything, a victim of amnesia. Suddenly, G-Corp jacks begin invading and the two dash and escape from the crumbling laboratory. And here we have our first gameplay mode, exactly how it was before. It's a Tekken Force mode in which you can play as either Lars or Alyssa fighting your way through G-Corp jacks and goons. We then see a very similar scene to the game, Alyssa telling Lars that she was waiting for her father. He can't put anything together, he's still confused. She tells him that he matches the same ID for Lars Alexanderson, a former Zaibatsu soldier. She informs him that he actually has a bounty on his head and that he's in danger. The only fragment of memory he has is the blast and wonders if that's how his supposed comrades must have died. Alyssa then says how there was a blast, but none of the soldiers died from blunt force trauma. From what she could tell, they all had their throats slit. This stops Lars in his tracks as he's wise enough to know that if someone wanted him dead in that moment, they easily could have done it. Suddenly, a minigun is firing. Alyssa shields Lars just in time to see Brian shooting at them, laughing like a maniac, before Lars can react. Fury! Alyssa screams as her eyes go red and she charges him. The all too experienced Brian throws his gun at her, launching her some distance. Lars prepares for a fight. You then play a normal round as Lars against Brian. Alyssa gets up to see Lars standing victorious. She's overjoyed, but he quickly asks her who this man was. She looks at him, and after hesitating, she can't answer. She can't put a name to his face and tells him that it must have been former programming. A quick line of defense given their lives were in danger. Lars takes note of this, pushing his initial trust of her. Then we get a scene change. Togu. Oh, by the way, Togu's a playable character in this version. Deal with it. Nah. Togu is investigating the destroyed laboratory by himself. He notices the bodies of his comrades, but Lars is missing. So is the girl in the chamber pod. Before he can look further into it, he hears footsteps. He quickly hides when Jin, Eddie, and Nina walk into the room. Jin and Nina assess the situation. So many casualties from their former soldiers, but the one leader is still MIA. Jin takes the opportunity to ridicule Eddie as this lab was under his command. Offended, Eddie snaps at Jin. "We wouldn't have lost so many soldiers if it wasn't for your leadership. You have a mystery command of soldiers ransacking civilians, military takeovers, sabotaging political treaties. And what the hell happened in Spain? That capital you bombed went to hell." Jin stops. We don't see his face, but this reaction leads us to believe that this may be the first time he's hearing of the Spain news. Nina stops Eddie from saying any more. Jin gives Eddie one look and reminds him why he should just follow orders. Otherwise, the sick won't receive any help. Eddie hesitantly nods, agreeing to keep his end of the deal. Jin whispers something to Nina, and the two walk away, leaving Eddie behind. Then we get another scene change. The streets of Japan are bustling. Civilians enjoying life, family shopping, and friends having fun. We see Hwoarang walking with Xiaoyu and Panda following behind. Xiaoyu was noticeably down given the worldwide news of Jin's misdeeds. Hwoarang is struggling to make small talk, doing anything he can to try and distract her. He talks about how mad Beck must be at him for leaving, how Japan is different from Korea, but nothing is getting through. He then stops in his tracks and assures Xiaoyu, "We'll find Jin, and even if I have to knock some sense into him, we'll get him back." Xiaoyu looks up for the first time and smiles, knowing she's not alone in this pain. We then see a parallel shot of Asuka walking ahead of Lily and Forrest, who's being dragged along. Lily is doing nothing but teasing Asuka over small stuff, and we can tell that Asuka is distracted, not really reacting to the clowning going on. Lily is willing to say just about anything to get in her head, and as the two groups pass each other on the street, Lily makes a loud joke. "Oh, just because your cousin became a dictator doesn't mean all Kazumas are cursed." Suddenly, Xiaoyu, Panda, and Hwoarang all stop and turn their heads. Forrest is the first to notice, then Lily and Asuka follow suit. Xiaoyu is about to say something, but is immediately cut off by Lily. "You common folk can't speak to me. Forrest, deal with them." Begrudgingly, Forrest drops all of the shopping bags that Lily had and prepares. Hwoarang versus Forrest, and then immediately Lily versus Xiaoyu. Now for these fights, as they're smaller, you're free to choose whoever, as it won't have a lasting effect on the plot. Kinda how you could in Brawl. But before the Lily versus Xiaoyu fight can be decided, Asuka steps in to stop them. Xiaoyu asks Asuka what her last name is. She hesitates and then answers. Xiaoyu and Hwoarang are shocked. They never knew anything about Jin's family, especially from his mother's side. It was always shrouded in mystery. We get a small flashback from Asuka's perspective. This flashback is a direct reference to the Tekken manga where Asuka first meets Jin at June's services. She remembers him having a kind smile, and she felt bad that someone so young was gonna be alone. Asuka has some shame when it comes to Jin. She feels like she could have been a more responsible cousin when it came to being there for him. And she has embarrassment that the last time she saw him, she knocked him out. And she does have a desire to try and stop him from the destruction he's seemingly causing. Xiaoyu grabs her hands and asks if she'll help find him. Before she can answer, Lily interrupts again with a cocky, "Fine, if you're begging, I guess we'll all help." And with that, we get what Tekken stories really need at this point: solid factions. Also, during scenes that feature this group, I would start sprinkling in some Asuka x Hwoarang stuff for the future. I'm a big shipper, and I think the dynamic of Hwoarang not wanting to admit he has a crush on a Kazuma and Asuka being embarrassed would be really nice to see. We cut back to Lars and Alyssa, this time at the docks. They don't get to say much before being surrounded by G-Corp again. Cue another Tekken 4 style mode where the two are mowing down enemies. Lars and Alyssa are exhausted from being on the run and constantly fighting, and they're seemingly surrounded again, this time by Zaibatsu soldiers. They do notice that none of the soldiers seem directly threatening, and after a moment, they all salute. Lars is confused when suddenly Togu appears. The two of them get to have the same private talk as before, but this time we're gonna add a little bit more. Togu realizes how bad the amnesia really is and tries to reiterate to Lars how important his leadership is, but it's useless if he doesn't know anything. Lars is able to spit out a name that holds meaning: Tina. Togu is shocked and grabs his necklace, which is holding a locket. Inside is a photo of a baby girl. Togu explains that Tina is her name, and the fact that Lars was able to remember shows the audience that little by little he's gaining memories again. It's also going to make Togu into more of a Maze Hughes type of character, which will fit better later on. Wink wink. The scene ends with Togu telling Lars to be cautious of his newfound companion and to try to find Heihachi Mishima. Lars gets a little headache as Togu explains that finding Heihachi might answer more questions that he needs to know. The two separate and we see that Zafina has been spying on them, but there's this weird aura seeping from her. She doesn't look human, she's clearly possessed. Her eyes have a weird glow and the energy radiating from her is visible. We cut to later as Kazuya, Bruce, and Anna are now at the abandoned docks. Kazuya asks how they could have escaped. Anna explains that they must have had help, and Kazuya reiterates just how vital Lars is to the endgame. He officially tasks Anna and Bruce with finding and capturing Lars. Anna gladly accepts while Bruce is noticeably quiet throughout. Anna then asks Kaz if it's time, and he nods. She snaps her fingers and a camera crew shows up. Kazuya then makes a propaganda video blaming the Zaibatsu for the destruction of the docks and the deaths of the G-Corp soldiers. This is important as the Zaibatsu had literally nothing to do with what's happened here. He also puts a bounty on Jin's head. As Kazuya is giving this speech, we see flashes of the characters in the game watching this on the news in their enclosed spaces. Another scene change, this time we see Paul and Law training at the gym. Law asks why Paul is so motivated and he makes a joke about once the Mishima start feuding, a tournament is bound to happen soon. You gotta remember, Paul has had a lot of experience with Kazuya when they were younger and even got to Ogre before Jin did. So it's funny and adds some fanservice lore that Paul is well aware that stuff is about to go down. Then you get a quick Paul v Law fight, choose whoever, it don't matter. After the fight, Steve walks in a bit late and is greeted by his friends. As the three talk, we see a shot of them from an outside perspective, and we see that someone is spying on them, but we only see the glove that the character is wearing. The scene changes to Lei typing on a computer. Christy is with him, but is also a million miles away as she's worried about Eddie. Lei tells her that he was able to track his last known location, but they both see that it's a destroyed lab. Christy is disheartened and Lei assures her that Eddie is strong and is likely okay. Suddenly a knock at the door. Lei gets up fast and looks through the peek hole to see Beck Dusan. He opens the door confused and Beck tells him that he knows that they're trying to find Eddie, which means they'll likely find Jin too. Beck demands that he joins them, as if he can find Jin then he'll likely see his student again. Lei is admittingly unwilling, as you can throw in some lore of Beck kicking his ass back in the Tekken 2 days, and so Beck demands that he earn his spot by fighting, as this is a fighting game story. You then get Beck versus Lei, and it doesn't matter who you choose as he's joining the group regardless. They then set off on their adventure. Back to Lars and Alyssa, who are following a clue that may lead them to Heihachi. You could squeeze in another Tekken Force mode here if you wanted, but they end up at the temple. They explore and realize that it's noticeably empty. As they get further inside, they see a tired Wang sitting in the center. Lars approaches him and Wang takes a second to get lost in his eyes. When he asks him why he's doing that, Wang smiles and says how he just reminds him of someone from his past. Lars asks about Heihachi and Wang looks down. He relents about how he consistently failed each Mishima and how no matter what he did, he could not break the cycle of violence. But he looks at Lars and says, "I won't fail another," and gives him Heihachi's last known location. After this happens, we hear gunfire and soldiers preparing to breach the temple. Lars and Alyssa immediately ready up and try to grab Wang, but he stops them. He tells Lars how his story is just beginning, and if he's gonna do what needs to be done, he needs to leave now. Lars is sad, but takes Alyssa's hand and runs away. Then Safina appears from behind Wang, still seeping energy. Wang asks if this was the plan. She answers yes. He takes a moment to reflect on her old personality, and for a moment we see Safina hesitate before the energy gets stronger and she demands what she's owed. Wang pulls out the same token that appeared from Jinpachi's body and returns it to her, and she leaves. This is a strong implication that Azazel sent part of himself to possess and reanimate Jinpachi, so now we actually have lore explanations as to his existence in Tekken 5. Wang isn't really saddened by this fate, as he finds comfort knowing Lars will do what he couldn't. We then get a super badass Tekken Force mode as it's Wang's last stand as he demolishes G-Corp goons. Bruce and Anna then appear on the scene and Wang prepares for a fight. You then play as Wang as you fight Anna and Bruce in a handicap tag mode. You have to defeat both of them to continue. Although you technically win the fight, Wang has exhausted his energy. He doesn't have much fight left in him as he falls to one knee. Anna starts walking towards him and asks where Lars is. Wang puts his second knee down and begins to meditate. Anna is an assassin. She knows all too well when someone accepts fate, so she doesn't bother wasting any more time. She pulls out a handgun, points it at his head, and pulls the trigger. Anna Williams has killed Wang Jinrei. Because why not? Wang is old, and if the new elderly fighter moving forward is gonna be Leroy, then give Wang a proper exit, something to be proud of. Wang dies protecting Lars and Alyssa, holding on to faith that they'll bring the peace he always wanted to see, leaving lasting effects on all the characters involved. Anna turns to see Bruce, who is just in shock at what's happened. He still hasn't had to get his hands super dirty in this war. Sure, he's killed opposing soldiers, but never direct citizens. Lying to the public, creating war and discourse, and for what? Anna calls to him and motions that they need to go. She doesn't even say words, she just steps over the lifeless body. Bruce follows, but slowly. We get another scene change and it's the pyramids. Jin and Nina arrive via helicopter, the same as the game. And like before, Zafina approaches, still cursed and possessed. She asks what business does a mass murderer have being here. Jin immediately tells her that he's well aware of the meddling that she and Kazuya are responsible for. It doesn't matter to her. He's already been branded a monster and the death toll will only continue to rise. Jin interrupts her with the name Azazel. She's stunned into silence that he knows the name. In defense, she brings up that the death of Wang Jinrei will cost Jin even his closest allies. Jin smirks and alludes to the fact that he already knew Wang was dead even though it hasn't been announced yet. He takes leave before saying that it's his turn to make a statement. Zafina is left standing there alone and shocked. We get another scene change as we see the aforementioned Shayu squad. They're together in some apartment room. Asuka and Lily are sitting quietly, Forrest is meditating, Panda is sleeping, Hwoarang is shaking with anger, clenching his fists as hard as he can. And lastly, we see Shayu, devastated, crying on the couch. The only sound we hear throughout this scene is the news on the TV reporting the murder of Wang Jinrei by the Mishima Zaibatsu. More framing and propaganda being shown to the audience but not the characters involved. Suddenly the news is interrupted by an emergency broadcast from the Zaibatsu itself. Jin, Nina, and Eddie all appear on screen, and we get flashes of every single character reacting to this. It appears I've made my fair share of enemies, so much so that my own father has put a bounty on my head. Power is everything, and if you want a chance at my head and at my power, then I'll gladly accept. I hereby announce the 6th Iron Fist Tournament. We get another soft scene change to Jin and Nina on their bikes secretly meeting up. They share similar dialogue from the original scene, but this time Nina asks Jin a question. Why did you take the blame for everything G-Corp did? The random bombings, military takeovers, mass killings, sure they were Zaibatsu soldiers doing this, but Jin had nothing to do with it. It was either G-Corp soldiers in disguise or turncoat soldiers leaving for the other side. All of the external destruction was carefully orchestrated by Kazuya himself. The only thing that Jin actively did was take over the UN after all the destruction, a move that only confirmed his supposed actions to the world. Jin explains that what's happened is what was destined to happen and you can't change destiny. Jin opens up to Nina that in order to stop Kazuya and Zafina, the world must see total chaos. This, in my opinion, is a much better way to do Jin's heel turn. Instead of making him directly responsible for causing all of the hate and destruction, take it out of his direct control. Instead of starting the chaos, he just didn't do much to stop it, because deep down he knew the sacrifice move at the end. He's a bit more of a nuanced character like this, and it's easier to get behind him as a protagonist again later on, considering he didn't directly kill anybody. The two leave and we see that not only was Raven spying on them, but Dragunov was too. And thus ends Act 1. The scene opens up with Lars and Alyssa in their car driving. Pretty much the exact scene we get in the game over Main. Togu warning Lars about how heavily guarded Hayachi's fortress is, Lars having an inner monologue about not trusting Alyssa, to her telling him what she knows about the area, all while Raven is spying on them. Honestly, much of the Lars and Hayachi stuff will be the same. Hayachi is training when one of his men tells him that people are coming for him. Hayachi tells them to do their best to stop them, but if they manage to make their way to him, to leave them be. If they're able to stand in front of him, then they're worth his time. Then we get another Tekken Force mode with Lars and Alyssa making their way through Hayachi's goons. We've been here before. Then we finally get the meeting between Hayachi and Lars. Before Lars can say anything, Hayachi prepares to fight. He says he is not worthy of his words yet and must prove his might. Lars versus Hayachi in a 3-stage boss fight, with Lars slowly gaining his memory back throughout. After the fight and Lars showcasing his Mishima electricity, Hayachi realizes who he is. Lars pulls out his gun and points it at his father. He pulls the trigger and the same as before, Hayachi bites the bullet to stop it. It's such a great scene, you gotta keep it in. Lars asks him if he plans on taking the Zaibatsu back by joining the tournament. Heihachi laughs and explains how he can take it back at any point and doesn't need to go so low like joining another Iron Fist tournament. Biding his time is more important at this moment. But like before, Togu calls Lars, interrupting the two. He accepts the call, and after hearing that he got his memory back, Togu tells Lars that he should get to Violet Systems headquarters to get more information on G-Corp and the Zaibatsu. Something big is coming. Lars tells his father that there's more pressing concerns than his own anger, so he's gonna let him go for now. Lars and Alyssa leave, but Heihachi doesn't do anything to stop them. He just watches his bastard leave in silence. The scene then changes to right before the tournament. A lot of the fighters are gathered around socializing or training. We get small focus shots on specific characters. Miguel, who looks furious, a very determined Bob, a shot of a hand holding the Armor King mask, and finally Steve, who just looks lost. Paul and Law are able to get his attention and he walks away with them. As he walks out of frame, we see Leo was behind him, staring directly at him. The tournament then begins. A good chunk of characters are in it, but at the same time a lot are sitting out for plot purposes. So pretty much all of these characters are out. Lars, Raven, Alyssa, Togu, Dragunov, Hwoarang, Xiaoyu, Panda, Asuka, Lily, Kazuya, Anna, Bruce, Jin, Nina, Eddie, Lee, Julia, Jack 6, Heihachi, Zafina, and Christy. With that in mind, the people competing in the tournament are Forrest, Leo, Steve, Paul, Law, Miguel, Lei, Beck, Kuma, Mokujin, Brian, Marduk, Fang, Bob, Armor King, Ganryu, Roger Jr., and Yoshimitsu. Now, like Tekken 8's story, you're gonna have some choices in who to pick for fights, except the final four absolutely have to be Bob, Armor King, Miguel, and Paul. In the first rounds, Miguel and Beck come face to face. Beck sees a look in Miguel's eyes that remind him of his former protege. Miguel has done his fair share of research, so he knows that Beck is with a group looking for those close to Jin. Miguel versus Beck, with Miguel taking the dub. After Miguel wins, Beck respects him and asks Miguel to accompany their group. He can feel the hate in his heart and wants to try to adjust it as he feels like he couldn't get through to Hwoarang. In fact, after he was hospitalized in 5, Beck is desperate to fix the mistakes of his past. He doesn't want to fail this student the way he feels he failed his last. Miguel gladly accepts and the two shake hands. Now, in between fights, we're gonna get some small scenes showcasing who's doing what, and since I'm too lazy to create a whole tournament bracket to do this, just take my word for it that these scenes will fit. I just don't have it in me to see how far Roger Jr. and Mokujin make it in this fantasy booking. That being said, one of the next fights is announced as Steve versus Leo, but neither one of them show up. We see Paul and Law in the audience looking concerned. The scene changes to Steve snooping around backstage. Keep in mind, in my head, the tournament is taking place in a Zaibatsu tower where the bottom floor is an arena for the fights, but at the top of the tower is Jin's throne room. Anything in between is Zaibatsu secrets. Steve is searching for more clues on his past as he still doesn't know much at this point, but he feels a presence behind him. He throws a punch, but it's caught by Leo. Steve asks them why they've been following him around so much. Leo tries to explain, but after revealing that they have some knowledge on Steve's childhood, he becomes enraged. I think Steve's character is a lot more interesting when he's holding his anger from his past, especially because he still doesn't know why he was experimented on or who his parents were. You then play as Steve as you fight Leo in a one-round fight with Steve winning. Steve sits back as his head is starting to hurt. He's almost drunk with traumatic memories, as not only being back in a Zaibatsu room is scary, but someone knowing his deepest secret is even scarier. Leo says his name, but when Steve looks up, he doesn't see Leo. He sees Emma, the only doctor who treated him nicely, who helped him escape. Enraged, he throws another punch and begins to fight. You then play as Leo against Steve, taking the second round. Leo is trying their best to calm Steve down. They tell him who their mother was and that she went missing all those years ago, around the same time that she helped Steve escape. Leo explains that all they want is to find out what happened to her and ask Steve for help. Steve is broken. The strong man who was held in secrecy was torn apart mentally by a stranger. Leo reaches out a hand, and Steve slowly accepts it. We then cut back to the tournament where Armor King takes on Marduk and King to advance. We get some small setup lore here that will lead into their character endings later on for the payoff. All you need to know is that King and Marduk are completely thrown off by the appearance of Armor King, almost like they're seeing a ghost. Then we cut to Beck and Miguel, who are investigating backstage when they're spotted by Zaibatsu guards. Then we get a quick Tekken Force brawl with the two men taking on a few hallways worth of jobbers. They find safety in a dark room when suddenly Beck is dropkicked and hits his back on a desk in a bad way. It's revealed to be Eddie Gordo who did it. Miguel recognizes that he's one of Jin's top men and is furious. He demands to know where Jin is, but Eddie doesn't say anything. His silence is almost deafening as he's slowly losing himself in this job. The two prepare to fight. Eddie versus Miguel in a two-stage boss fight. In between rounds, Beck tries to grab Miguel to get him to escape, but he tosses his arm away. Eddie stands victorious. Beck is too hurt to help, and in Eddie's earpiece we hear Jin telling him to exterminate the intruders. Eddie winds up an axe kick and throws his foot down only to be caught by Christy. He's shocked to see her as she wasn't in the tournament. She finally gets her chance to scream at him for making her chase him down for so long. She tells him that she knows why he's doing that, but asks if this will be worth it. Even if you save my grandfather's life, will you even be able to look him in the eyes? He's struggling to listen, but Jin again demands that Eddie do his job unless he wants his master to lose everything. We then get Christy versus Eddie in a heartbreaking fight. Christy is able to scrap away with a win when suddenly a minigun firing from outside the window makes everyone hit the floor. Everybody scatters and escapes, and it's revealed to be Anna in a helicopter who was firing. Eddie is seen looking more conflicted and damaged than ever before. Can he truly keep doing this? What even is the cost of it anymore? We then see that Jin and Nina were watching the whole thing on surveillance. Nina is pissed to see Anna, and a soldier asks if Jin wants Miguel removed from the tournament. Jin admires his tenacity and says that he must remain. As he says this, Nina gives him a worried look. Moving back to the tournament, Bob goes on to beat Ganryu and Fang, and Paul moves on after the no contest with Steve to face Kuma and Law. And Miguel faces off against Brian and Yoshimitsu, sure, who cares. The final four are brought on stage and we see Jin make an appearance, looking down on them from above. He promised that the winner will get a shot at the bounty on his head. In the audience, we see a concerned Shiyu and Horang, plus Asuka and Lily. Forrest is also with them, but has an ice pack after losing one of the fights. Jin announces that the winner will be able to come to the top of the tower for a fight and the semifinals begin. Bob versus Paul with Bob winning, and Miguel versus Armor King with Miguel taking the win, leaving the last match as Miguel versus Bob. The final match is hyped up a lot, and it should be a big deal that two newcomers made their way to the finals. Keep it in mind that a lot of legacy characters sat out the tournament for various reasons. We then get Miguel versus Bob, with Miguel winning the 6th Iron Fist tournament. Jin looks down on Miguel and smirks. Miguel is furious but is again stopped by Beck. Lei and Christy follow suit. Jin tells him that he and his friends can make their way up to the tower and the group is escorted off stage. We then see Shiyu squad sneaking away in the crowd following Miguel. They also notice at the same time lots of guards are getting calls. Some are running away, some are standing guard, and others are reloading. And it looks like they're all preparing for something big. The scene changes back to Lars and Alyssa as they approach Violet Systems headquarters. They're surrounded by troops very suddenly, which surprises Lars as he didn't expect them to be so heavily armored. Lee walks out cocky but not threatening. That being said, Lee, like his adopted father, wants to get to know Lars through combat. Lars versus Lee. Choose whoever as it won't impact the plot too much, and it's also the only time you'll be able to play as Lee during the story mode. Sorry about that. After the fight, Lee is amazed by Lars. He immediately recognizes that he's a Mishima and begins to laugh and jokes about how much more interesting this story could get. Lars explains that he knows who Lee is and demands to know his loyalty. Lee laughs even harder and wonders why anyone thinks he owes any allegiance to any Mishima apart from himself. Their conversation goes the same after this, with Lee asking if Lars would like to join forces. Lars legitimately considers the deal before Lee gets a phone call from a distressed employee who was captured. Lars and Alyssa ask to help Lee as a gesture of good faith. Lee accepts and gives them the employee's info, revealing that it's Julia who's trapped in a G-Corp building. We then transition to that G-Corp building, but we see Steve and Leo investigating as they learned while in the Zaibatsu Tower that Emma spent some time at G-Corp as well. They're hiding when they find Julia, who was also investigating. Her position gets compromised. You then play as Julia fighting a couple Jacks one by one. She's exhausted after the battle and is knocked out by the official Jack 6 from behind. Steve sees this and tries to help, but is stopped by Leo. Leo explains that they can't help her if they're all caught and that they'll try to break her out after they get the info that they need. The two sneak into a computer lab and successfully hack into a computer. It's here where the two get so much revealed to them. They learn that Nina is Steve's biological mother. He was experimented on to see if they could manifest the devil gene through science. The only kind doctor assigned to care for him was Emma Cleason, and after disappearing, she was employed by G-Corp to study the devil gene before disappearing yet again. They're both distracted by this when Jane walks into the room and frantically asks who they are. They both turn to see Jack 6 standing behind her. You then play as Steve and Leo against Jack in a handicap tag mode. Jack powers down after losing. Jane rushes to his side and is interrogated by the two. They ask how she could create weapons for G-Corp and ignore the evil that they've done. From Jane's perspective, she's on the good side. She explains that G-Corp is the only thing standing in the way of the tyrannical Zaibatsu. Leo tries to explain to her that it's all propaganda orchestrated by Kazuya himself in a method to wage war onto the world. Jane screams that war is what killed her parents and the only person who cared for her as a child was the Jack robot. G-Corporation gave her an opportunity to rebuild and enhance Jack after he gave his life for her, so how could she not take their side? Jane's cries wake Jack up and he chokes both Steve and Leo, holding them in the air. They try to reason with her, but Jane cuts them off, yelling about how nobody could understand her pain. Leo screams back that they know the pain of losing a mother. Steve yells the pain of being a scared and alone child and how it feels when the only person who helped is stolen from you. As he says this, Leo looks at Steve concerned. This is a whole new side of him. Jane breaks down and orders Jack to let them go. He does, and the two begin coughing and trying to catch their breath. She tells them where Julia is being kept, and the two go for the door before Jane says the name Emma. They both turn, and Jane sadly states that she always envied Emma because throughout it all, she was always smiling. Leo is choked up and sheds a tear. Steve grabs them and they go. We then cut back to Lars and Alyssa meeting up with Togu as they prepare to breach G-Corp HQ. We then get another mini Tekken Force mode with Lars and Alyssa taking down G-Corp goons. They don't make it very far before Anna surrounds them with an army, and just like before, Togu and Yggdrasil make the save as Alyssa takes Lars and they fly away. Togu stands tall and kisses the locket of his daughter. Another small Tekken Force mode but with Togu taking on a G-Corp army. At the end of it all, only Togu and Anna are still standing. All other members were killed in combat. They lock eyes and prepare for the worst. Alyssa and Lars fly through a window that she knew Julia was in after scanning the building. They see that Leo and Steve had just arrived and were helping an unconscious Julia. She awakes to a room full of people and is shocked before Lars explains that Lee sent them. This calms her down, but she immediately remembers her intel and explains how important it is that they leave now. She explains that G-Corp is launching a full-on assault on the Zaibatsu Tower where countless innocents are at. As soon as the finals end, the raid will begin. Lars takes note of this and asks Steve and Leo to help her escape as now he has more pressing issues to attend to. They all agree and separate. We cut back to the bottom floor as we get a Togu vs Anna boss fight. The soldier is able to keep up with the assassin, but Anna has the upper hand. She's too much of a killer for Togu. There's a great cinematic scene of her slowly cutting up Togu little by little, but he keeps standing and fighting despite knowing he's done. Anna is smiling through the violence and admires his resolve. Togu stands one last time, but is shot in the gut. Anna turns to see Bruce holding a gun, doing his duty. Togu falls to his knees and begins to bleed out. Anna calls to Bruce and tells him to ready the troops as they're running behind. The two leave, and not long after, Alyssa and Lars make their way back to the scene to see how much blood was shed. We pretty much get the exact scene as before, but I think it'll carry a lot more weight as we really humanize Togu before his demise. Giving him family and a strong soldier-like resolve makes him more of a dynamic character and will really get the audience to feel as he dies in Lars' arms. Like before, Raven is again seen watching the whole thing. After this, we transition back to the end of the tournament rumbling. Soldiers getting ready when suddenly a huge explosion is heard from outside. The crowd is concerned when suddenly, all at once, Zaibatsu soldiers begin turning on each other. Some are firing into the audience, and a G-Corp tank and battalions of troops blow the front doors down and enter the arena. A big army fight scene is shown here, and it's wonderful chaos. Xiaoyu squad sees this and begins helping civilians. Asuka yells at Xiaoyu to go find Jin and that they can take it from here. She hesitates and Lily snaps her out of it, assuring that they can handle this, and commands Hwoarang to grab her and run. Hwoarang, Xiaoyu, and Panda all make a break for it. Forrest tries to accompany them, but Lily makes him stay cause that's funny. We then get a whole lot of different fighting modes right here. Another Tekken Tag style mode with Asuka and Lily taking on random G-Corp jacks, a Tekken Force mode with Forrest taking on a bunch of soldiers, another tag mode with Paul and Law taking on a bunch of goons. Amidst the chaos, Eddie is seen taking out randos. Suddenly he's forced to block an uppercut from Bruce. The two lock eyes and can immediately see that neither one of them really believes in their side. Nevertheless, they stand on opposite sides and must settle their differences. Eddie versus Bruce, with Eddie taking the first round. Nothing but sheer pride keeps Bruce up as they go another round, this time with Bruce taking the win. Bruce knocks Eddie to the floor and begins to look around, and this time he truly sees what's around him. The chaos unfolding, civilians crying, soldiers firing guns, death and brutality everywhere. How much bloodshed has happened over a war that Kazuya started? Sure, they bonded in the past and a payday is just that, but can he really go through with this? There's a good shot of Bruce walking through the hails of gunfire, exiting the story mode completely, giving up on his life with G Corporation. Eddie is lying on the ground facing the ceiling. He became a monster, and for what? To save his master and help Christy smile, but now the opposite has happened. She might hate him and his master still might die, so why continue? As he's blinking and fading to unconsciousness, he sees Christy and her grandfather training. And for the first time in the story, he smiles as he closes his eyes. This will be the last time we'll see him in this story mode, and his payoff will be in the character endings. We then see Anna causing complete havoc in the arena. She shoots a rocket launcher at a bunch of soldiers, and one of her men asks her what her plan is. She smiles and says that she just wants the attention of somebody, and like clockwork, Nina pulls up. They don't speak, just smile, and then fight. Nina versus Anna in a 3-stage fight where you switch characters each round. There isn't a definitive winner, as during the last round, Yggdrasil blows another wall up and enters the fight. The two sisters look more annoyed than anything, and we get a pretty fun and cool temporary team up with them taking out the rebels. As Yggdrasil joins the fight, Lars, Alyssa, Leo, and Steve all join in. It doesn't take long before Nina turns on her sister and shoots a zipline towards the ceiling and begins to make her escape. Right before she zooms upward, she looks forward and makes eye contact with Steve. The two look at each other with shock now that both of them know who each other are, but before anything can be said, she flies away. We then get some good cinematic shots of all the fighters left on the floor kicking ass. Lars is communicating some of the chaos to Lee, and we see that Julia made it back safely to him. We then see Miguel's squad in the elevator, and they can hear the chaos but don't know what's happening. Everybody looks concerned except for Miguel, who is just waiting for those doors to open. They do, and Jin is seen waiting for his opponent. Miguel versus Jin in a multi-layered boss fight. In between rounds, Miguel finally reveals why he's fought this far. He yells at Jin that it was his men that bombed Spain and killed his sister on her wedding day. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and instead it was her last. Jin is stunned, and so is everyone else. Miguel vows that as long as he lives, he will never forgive Jin. We then cut to Xiaoyu, Hwoarang, and Panda all running and fighting their way to the top of the tower. Throw in a Tekken Force mode here if you want, but regardless, they make their way into the throne room to see Jin fighting Miguel. Jin knocks Miguel down and wins the fight. He turns to see his friends, and they all look at each other with faces of familiarity, sadness, and grief over their lost lives. We then check in with Nina, who's escaped to her room to keep her composure. She didn't anticipate two armies at once, and she sure didn't know that her son would be there. The door is breached by Lars and Alyssa, and they demand to know where Jin is, but immediately, Nina disables Alyssa's safe mode. Alyssa then turns on Lars, confusing him. Nina explains that this was all part of Jin's plan, him finding her, befriending her, and trusting her. If Lars is worthy of Jin's time, then he must now defeat the only comrade he has left. Nina leaves, but tells Lars exactly where to find Jin once he's done. We then get a 2-stage fight with Lars versus Alyssa as you switch between the two. In the end, Alyssa stands victorious. Alyssa is unable to kill Lars and flies away, leaving him broken and defeated. So much has happened, and is this really how it ends? We then cut back to the deafening silence of the throne room. Before anyone can say anything, a loud gunshot is heard. Everyone turns and no one is sure what's happened until it's revealed that Jin was shot in the chest from a sniper far away. That sniper was Dragunov. As Jin is lying on the floor bleeding out, we get a flashback. We see a younger Jin standing in a bedroom door about to leave, and Xiaoyu is sitting on the bed asking him to stay. This is during Tekken 3, right before Jin leaves for the tournament finals, right before he faces Ogre, and right before he's betrayed by his grandfather. Xiaoyu is begging for him not to leave, to try to move on from his painful past, to try and live in the now. Jin can't. He never knew his father. His mother was his only family, and that was torn away from him. He goes on to say, "I can't be normal. I can't even pretend to anymore. There's this bloodlust in me that won't leave until I find and kill the beast that took my mother away." Xiaoyu looks at him. "But don't you see? If you go down this path, fighting and bloodshed is all you'll have. You won't be able to tell what's right and wrong. You can't want that." Jin straightens his posture. "All I want is vengeance." "All you want?" Xiaoyu turns away from him. "Fine, then go. If this is really what you want, and this is really who you are, then leave. If we're really something you could just throw away, then do it. I won't try to stop you anymore." Jin embraces Xiaoyu from behind. She's speechless. "I don't expect you to understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I wish I could stay with everyone. Am I selfish? I wish I could move on and ignore this cursed bloodline. Am I foolish? I'll have these simple memories forever. Should I cherish? They'll stay with me as I walk into hell. Should I anguish?" Xiaoyu turns her head to make eye contact with Jin. We cut back to the present moment as Jin is lying lifeless on the ground. Everyone is stunned. Xiaoyu screams as Hwoarang rushes to Jin's side when suddenly lightning strikes the tower. The floor begins to break, the walls are crumbling away, and Devil Jin rises from the ground. Everyone is in disbelief. Xiaoyu is shocked. Hwoarang remembers his power and quickly backs away. Lei looks at him with a terrifying familiarity as he remembers what Kazuya was from his time with June. Miguel rises one last time and acknowledges that Jin truly is the devil. Miguel versus Devil Jin in a very hard boss fight. Throughout the fight, we hear cries from the watchers to stop and that it's too dangerous. The fight is suddenly stopped by Beck, who apprehends Miguel. However, full of too much rage and power, Miguel breaks the back of Beck Dusan, paralyzing him. Hwoarang yells for his fallen master and charges Miguel. We then get Hwoarang versus Miguel, with Hwoarang taking the win. He stands over his opponent with so much anger before rushing to his master's unconscious body. Lei gets a message in his earpiece and we can't hear what's said, but afterwards he looks at Christy with a disheartened face, implying he was informed of the death of her grandfather. It's become clear that if anyone wants to survive, they all need to go. Lei picks up Miguel and he and Christy escape. Nina appears diving into the arms of Devil Jin. He recognizes her and spreads his wings and flies away. Xiaoyu looks to the sky saddened but quickly hops on Panda. They turn to see Hwoarang picking up Beck and running away. The tower collapses, completely devastating the city. From another building, Dragunov is seen grinning. All the characters are broken emotionally and physically, and thus ends Act 2. Act 3 picks up immediately where Act 2 ended and will be much more narrative driven compared to action oriented. We open up in a hospital room. Beck is in bed and Hwoarang is staring at him completely saddened. His lack of focus may have had some causality in the situation. If he had just stayed by his master's side, would things have been different? We see a full shot of the room again, but Hwoarang is gone. We only hear his motorcycle starting in the distance. We then transition to the destruction of the tower. Relief teams are helping the injured. Surviving fighters from the tournament are also helping. We see Asuka roaming around in a daze. She's holding her head and is disoriented as we see flashes of Yakushima, Jin, and the desert where the ruins are. In the distance, we hear an extremely panicked Lily asking if people have seen Asuka. They turn to see each other, and we actually get a rare emotional moment between the two as Lily embraces the person that means the most to her, before immediately pushing her aside, trying to save face as she normally does. Forrest also appears, and Lily looks indifferent to his survival. They all turn to see Shayu sitting down, looking absolutely broken. They all look at her with sadness as none of them have any clue as to what to say anymore. We then cut to Lars on the run. He's hurt, his army's scattered, and he just lost two of the most important people in his life. He's running in underground tunnels and passageways to avoid being seen when suddenly through the ceiling Nancy appears. Lars is exhausted but readies up to fight when suddenly Raven makes the save. In another tag style mode, Raven and Lars take on the giant robot Nancy now, cause I honestly completely forgot about this thing until writing. Raven introduces himself to Lars and assures him that they're on the same side. Lars is hesitant, but honestly has no allies left, so is forced to trust him. Raven reveals that he knows where Jin is, but Lars already knew since Nina told him directly. This just confirms that Nina was telling the truth, and also that Raven's info is good. We then cut to the desert as Jin and Nina land in their helicopter. Jin stops moving when he hears a bike in the distance and instantly knows who's coming for him. Nina offers to handle it for him, but Jin declines, waiting for his old rival himself. Hwoarang catches up and the two come face to face. Jin is holding on to his persona and Hwoarang is filled with rage. Neither one of them speak. Hwoarang just spits on the ground and the two fight. Jin versus Hwoarang, with Jin winning. Jin calmly tells his old friend that he has too much anger to win. His emotions have betrayed him. This triggers Hwoarang as he finally screams at Jin. How could you become this monster? How could you send countless to their deaths? How could you abandon her? Why? Jin stops, and for the first time in the story, we see him get emotional. He's always known what he's had to do but forced himself to ignore the cost, and it's finally caught up to him. Jin turns and tells Hwoarang that he just doesn't understand, and that he's doing this for them. Hwoarang looks up and sees a tear welling up in Jin's eye as he walks away. As he's leaving, he says, "Please leave, and make sure she's okay." With that, Jin and Nina leave Hwoarang in the desert alone. We then move to the entrance of the temple. Kazuya and Anna are waiting with the unconscious body of Zafina. Jin and Nina slowly make their way to them and ask if she's dead. Kazuya responds that something is preventing her demise, and Jin remarks how callous his father is for quickly turning on the woman who helped him get this far in the world's destruction. Kaz laughs and responds that the world will forever see Jin as the true demon, and once they see the truth, it'll be too late. He makes statements on Jin's morality, that even though he didn't orchestrate the chaos, he didn't stop it or tell the public the truth. He just went along with it, making it so much easier for Kazuya. Kazuya asks his son why he did this. Jin's response is simple. The nightmares that have been haunting Jin for the last 2 games were Azazel himself, showing Jin the inevitable destruction to try and weaken his psyche. In order for Azazel to unleash the power to conquer the world, it must defeat those left standing with the devil gene, so it must defeat Kazuya and Jin. But in order for Azazel to even awaken, humanity itself must be in total fear and constant destruction. Jin knew what was coming and that he had to let it happen, although it killed him to do so. He couldn't let the threat of Azazel continue to live after he was gone. In order to save the world, this was the only way. But what world would there be left to save after the sacrifice? This, in my opinion, makes a lot more sense for Jin's character. He's still redeemable, most of his evil was putting on an act, and at the end, he was still trying to do the right thing. But the fact that he let so much chaos unfold will haunt him forever, and that ties well into his arc in Tekken 7 and 8 as someone who still feels like they can't save anyone. Jin then wonders what kind of nightmares or visions his father saw to put his trust in someone like Zafina. Kazuya remarks how there is nothing left to say between them and leaves his son with one bit of advice. If you intend to conquer me, you must conquer yourself. Even your mother knew that. Enraged, Jin takes on his dad. Jin versus Kazuya in a multi-stage boss fight. Nina and Anna also begin fighting, but you don't have to play through it. You can if you want to, but you know. Jin and Kazuya do the iconic double punch, but it's interrupted by Lars coming in from above with an electric downward kick, revealing to the two that he is also a Mishima. Kazuya looks more annoyed than anything, and Jin is stunned. We see a really cool cinematic three-way fight between them while also showing Raven interrupting the Williams sisters. It all culminates with Kazuya turning into his devil form and begins wreaking havoc, destroying parts of the ruins. We see Zafina's eyes open very suddenly, still possessed by Azazel. Kazuya feels a presence and calls for Anna and flies away. The remaining four are surprised by this when Alyssa comes out of nowhere to attack Lars. You then play as Lars versus Alyssa one last time. Lars is forced to make the final blow to his comrade. Alyssa falls and Lars rushes to her side. She confesses the same dialogue from the game, apologizing for not being able to control her programming and only wishing to travel with him a little bit longer. Lars reaches his hand out to hers, but she falls. Alyssa has powered down and Lars is heartbroken. Jin relishes in this, calling her useless. Not just to be mean, but hoping that Mishima's fury and hatred will be the final nail in the coffin to waking Azazel. Lars versus Jin in the last normal boss fight in the game. The fight is interrupted when Zafina puts two devices into the giant still intact doors of the ruins and beams of light start peeking through outside. In an instant, the ruins are destroyed completely and Azazel appears, standing before everyone. He demands that the world will be his due to the destiny he put together, cursing the Mishimas with visions, possessing Jinpachi and Zafina, and the creation of the Hachijo clan. Lars and Raven are in shock. Nina stands ready to fight, but Jin looks confident, almost happy to see the beast. Once Azazel falls, then all that Jin sacrificed will have been worth it. His fight will be over. Azazel being the source of the devil gene, only someone with that power can stop him. It's all up to Jin. Jin rushes Azazel and punches him in the chest so hard that they both fall into a huge pit created by the destruction. But this doesn't kill the beast. Raven and Lars, without hesitation, follow Jin to hell. Nina, however, stays back. They end up in the final stage. Azazel throws Jin through a couple of walls and roars at Lars and Raven. You then play an unwinnable fight as Raven versus Azazel, and then immediately as Lars versus Azazel, losing both to the giant demon. Jin appears again, this time with so much hate and vengeance in his eyes. Azazel cursed his bloodline from the very start and has been responsible for all of the disaster that led to his reawakening. Jin threw away everything he cared about so that he could prevent this. He has to see this through. The last fight in the game, you play as Jin versus Azazel in a very difficult boss fight. Halfway through, you transform into Devil Jin to finish the demon off. Devil Jin lasers the orb containing Azazel's essence and then grabs a hold of it with his claws. With all the strength he has left, he somehow manages to lift Azazel up and then slam him down, breaking the floor beneath them. The two fall into the abyss and never make it back up. A very injured Raven and Lars watch this happen. They help each other up and wonder if the conflict is over. Raven explains to Lars that Jin had it planned from the start and that he wasn't as evil as he once thought. Not nearly as much as Lars' newfound brother. Lars gains an understanding and mourns his misunderstood nephew for the life he should have had. The two start to climb back up. Quickly, we get a scene change back to the desert as we see Shayu, Panda, Asuka, Lily, and Forrest all in an armored jeep racing through the sand. A big focus on the vehicle is the Violet Systems logo on the side of it. They start to see the ruins in the distance and end up catching up to it only to find a limping Hwoarang already there. Zaibatsu soldiers begin piling in to find Nina and await orders. Everyone is waiting to see who climbs up that hole. Nina listens very carefully and is able to determine what has happened and orders the soldiers to retreat. They hesitate before following her order and all leave. The remaining fighters are confused by this as we see Raven helping Lars up to the outside. Lily and Forrest are in disbelief. Panda puts her head down. Asuka is speechless. Hwoarang closes his eyes and holds back tears. And lastly, we see Shayu fall to her knees, screaming in pain for the loss of her love. As far as anyone knows, Jin has perished and none of his friends knew he did it for them. Only Hwoarang has some type of idea, but he'll never be able to confirm it. As Raven and Lars are looking at Jin's grieving allies, we hear static coming from Raven's earpiece. We then see, from behind mind you, Master Raven in a ship demanding to know the situation. Raven hesitates, looks at Shayu one last time, and reports, Jin Kazuma is missing. And for the mid-credit scene, cause I'm a selfish boy, it opens up with Lars and Raven having a brief and slow discussion about the very bleak future that awaits. Lars states that there are 2 extremely dangerous Mishimas left, and if he has a chance at stopping them, he needs her to wake up. As this line is said, we see that Alyssa is back in the chamber pod, reminiscent of how we first saw her. Lee walks in and assures Lars that they have the best possible people working on her and will make sure that she's okay. As he says this, we see Dr. Boskanovich walk into the room holding Alyssa, and he looks sad but determined. Lars shakes Lee's hand, and more credits roll. The post-credit scene opens up with Kazuya in a helicopter. He's human again, and Anna is intercepting the radio talk so they can hear what's going on. As the final line is delivered, we see Kazuya react in real time. At the same time, we see Heihachi meditating in his home, and he opens his eyes. We see swapping scenes of the two preparing. Kazuya looks like he's ready to take on the future, and Heihachi looks like he's ready to take on the past. The final shot is a close-up of Heihachi's face as he's staring down. He looks sad, distant, and it's just an emotion that we never see on the man. It cuts to the floorboard at which he was staring, and it's the markings he made all those years ago. Heihachi and Kazumi is the final piece we'll see in Tekken 6. Whoo, boy, what did y'all think? And as much as you might want it to be over, guess what? It ain't over! So real quick, I wanted to address some character ending changes to fit with the new story we created. So let's get that out of the way. Now there's certain endings that you'll have to wait to unlock until you beat the story for spoiler purposes, and I'm not changing everybody's, just a select few, so let's get started with... Wang's ending begins with him meditating in the same position he was before he died in the game. Although the background is different, he's on a familiar hill with a light sky in the distance. He opens his eyes, and instead of seeing a grave, he sees his former friend, Jinpachi Mishima, standing tall. He turns and greets his old friend with a smile, and Wang is in disbelief, only to let it go as he understands what this means. He shakes his friend's hand, and the two stare off into the sunset as they finally achieve the peace they have been searching for their entire lives. Lars' ending begins with him knocking on the door of some civilian house. The door opens and we see a woman with a young girl. They immediately recognize Lars, and the woman holds the young girl as tightly as she can. It's up to us as the audience to recognize that this is Togu's family, and we see a shot of the mourning family with Lars having nothing to say from above as the camera fades to black. Alyssa's ending begins with her in the chamber pod. A very tired Dr. B sits at her side and monologues about how he will fix her, how she will be okay this time. He's shaking and doesn't know what to do until he stops very suddenly. He looks down to see that his hand stops shaking because she held on to it. We see a shot of her face still unconscious as the scene ends, signifying that she's far from recovery, but she will return. Togu's ending begins with blurry vision, bullets flying and blood splattering. Throughout it all, we see a female hand reach through and Togu takes it. As he stands, we see nothing but light. No more blood, no more war. He looks in front of him to see his wife. The two talk about how it was his destiny as a soldier to die in battle, and how neither one of them really are surprised. She asks if he has any regrets being a soldier instead of ordinary. When he looks back at her, she's holding their daughter. Togu begins to well up, as he does regret leaving his family behind, but before he can say anything, she cuts him off, telling him not to regret it. If it wasn't for Togu, hundreds, maybe even thousands of families would be torn apart, and he was vital in making sure that they would be okay. He hugs his family one last time as the camera fades to light. Raven's ending is changed to the very last scene in the original game, him finding an unconscious Jin in the desert. Nothing really fancy here. Dragunov's ending begins with Kazuya speaking to somebody in a dark room. He keeps complimenting the skill of whoever he's speaking to, and we're led to believe that Dragunov is just spying again. Until Kazuya reaches out his hand and explains that he would like to work with this person, we see Dragunov come out of the shadows and shake the devil's hand. Hwoarang's ending begins with him back in the hospital by his master's side, who still hasn't woken up. He sits and talks about his regrets. He talks about how everything has changed, how he doesn't believe Jin is gone, and how he desperately wants to find him, but feels like he can't. When he did try before, so much went wrong. He almost starts to cry before he hears Beck yell his name, and on instinct, he stands in position before realizing what's just happened. He slowly turns toward the bed, and the scene ends. Beck's ending picks up right where Hwoarang's leaves off, as Beck wakes up in the hospital. He's alive, but he'll never fight again. He yells at his student that he did not raise a quitter. He did not raise someone who cries when things get hard. He did not teach someone with such a lack of mental fortitude to fight. He reassures and demands Hwoarang to continue his journey until the wheels fall off, and the student emotionally agrees, bows, and then runs off. Beck leans back in the bed and smiles. Xiaoyu's ending is pretty much the same thing, desperately calling out to Jin to try and stop him from dying, saving him, but ultimately waking up as it was a dream. But instead of a comedy gag, she wakes up and begins silently crying as it slowly fades out. Panda's ending is reminiscent of her ending in 4, as she and Xiaoyu are sitting quietly after all that's happened. Xiaoyu tells Panda not to worry about her so much. She has faith that Jin is alive and she just needs to find him again, but this time she doesn't want to journey alone and asks Panda to accompany her. Panda smiles and hugs Xiaoyu as the scene ends. Asuka's ending begins with her meditating in her father's dojo. Her eyes are closed, but she's struggling. She sees flashes of Jin in danger, counteracting the devil gene, Azazel, and then lastly, only briefly, Jun Kazuma. Asuka shocks herself out of her state and holds her heart. She asks herself, what is the power of the Kazuma blood, as we fade to black. Lily's ending picks up right where Asuka's left off, as she enters the dojo extremely obnoxiously, interrupting the meditation. The two argue, then fight, the end. Forrest's ending is gonna be funny, as it's just him attempting to live a normal life with Paul and Law before it ends with him getting dragged away by Lily. This happens while they're training, eating, mountain climbing, pretty much whatever you want. Bruce's ending begins with him on the run. After he went AWOL, Kazuya sent G-Corp goons after him, and he's suddenly surrounded in a dark alleyway. He takes out the 5 or so goons and is out of breath, but after a helicopter light is nearing his position, he escapes. Jin's ending begins with a nightmare sequence similar to 4. He sees flashes of Kazuya, Heihachi, Azazel, and then we see images of his friends in pain, the people he couldn't save, and then finally, his mother, but with her back turned to him. He reaches out and yells, "Mother, no! I'm sorry!" As it all fades to black, we see a shot of him lying in the sand, still unconscious, still a long way from defeating his father. Steve's ending begins with him training with Leo. In between moves, Steve asks how Emma was as a mother. Leo answers with, kind, nurturing, and she always showed she cared. And then they ask how she was with Steve. Steve pauses and then replies with, all the same. Miguel's ending begins with him at the destroyed church where his sister died. He has sunglasses on and we can't see his emotion. In the distance, we hear a radio transmission reporting the news of Jin's disappearance. We see Miguel's fist clench tightly before slowly loosening. Zafina's ending begins with her unconscious body at the ruins, but no longer exuding energy. She wakes up in a daze. She doesn't know where she's at and looks down at all the destruction. She begins stumbling into the tunneled path where Jin and Azazel fell as the screen fades to black. And that would wrap it up pretty much. Everybody else's ending I'd keep the same. I'd honestly like to add more to Eddie and Christy, but it's just such a perfect payoff that I really don't know what else I'd change, at least right now. I changed a ton, and a lot of it was my personal headcanon that I wanted addressed, so I'd understand if not everyone liked it as much as I did. With the story, we send off characters like Wang, Beck, and even Bruce if you want, although I'd still do a little bit more with him in Tekken 7. And we get a lot of love and future setup with Asuka, Hwoarang, Steve, and Leo. Plus we get some interesting new villains with genuine concern like Miguel and Zafina. I just think that the Tekken world and its characters are far more interesting than what we see in the games, especially during Tekken 6. And with that, it's over. How I would fix or suppose change the Tekken 6 story. Did you like it? Hate it? What would you have wanted to see happen differently? And would you mind seeing another video like this again? I'd love to change just about everything in Tekken 7 story mode, so I'm not against doing something like this again, although it is very time consuming. Thanks for watching. Until next time, remember, care responsibly.
貴様のせいで母さんは私は平八さんを止めないといけないのです。たとえこの力に飲まれ命を失うことになったとしても。